All right, welcome. Today we're going to break down the United States. And I don't just mean looking at a map. We're talking about the ideas, the struggles, and the people that really form its foundation. We're going to see how all these different pieces actually fit together.
So, it really all starts with a question like this one, doesn't it? How do you take a big concept like freedom and actually turn it into a nation? That's exactly what we're going to dig into, using the core building blocks of American history.
First things first, before any colonies, before any constitutions, you had the land itself. And, of course, the people who had called it home for centuries. So that's where we've got to start.
You've really got to forget any idea of a single, uniform culture before the Europeans arrived. The diversity was just incredible. I mean, out in the dry Southwest, you had the Pueblos who built these amazing permanent settlements. Now, contrast that with the huge open grasslands of the Great Plains. Tribes like the Cheyenne were often nomadic, their whole lives intertwined with the movements of the buffalo herds. And then, way up in the Great Lakes region, people farmed the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash. Each group was just so perfectly adapted to its own unique geography.
And that's exactly why that common mental image, the idea that all Native Americans lived in teepees, is a complete myth. Their homes, their lifestyles, they were as varied as the land itself. Which really means diversity has been a fundamental part of this story from the very, very beginning.
Okay, so let's move to the next phase, the next building block, creating a brand new nation. After European settlement, this new idea started to take root, the idea of governing yourself. This is the blueprint phase.
This wasn't just some catchy slogan they put on a flag. No, this was the absolute heart of the conflict. The American colonies felt the British government was taking their money through taxes, but giving them zero say, no voice in how that government was run. This single idea, right here, fueled a revolution.
And that powerful idea? Well, it led directly to war. The American Revolution was the actual fight to turn that demand for representation into the reality of independence. It was all about breaking away from Britain to form a new country run by its own people.
So once they won, how did they design this new government to make sure they didn't just end up with another king? Well, they deliberately split the power into three pieces. You have the legislative branch, that's Congress. Their job is to make the laws. Then you have the executive branch, led by the president, who enforces those laws. And finally, the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, gets the final say on whether a law is even constitutional. The whole point is to create checks and balances, so no single part gets too powerful.
And here's a really key detail about that judicial branch. Supreme Court justices, they're appointed for life. Now, why would they do that? Well, the thinking is that it insulates them from the shifting winds of politics. It lets them make decisions based on the Constitution alone, not on who happens to be popular or in power at the moment.
But creating a blueprint for freedom and actually extending that freedom to every single person, well, those are two very different things. This next part is all about the nation's long and often very violent struggle to live up to its own founding ideals.
And you just can't see that struggle any clearer than in the Civil War. I mean, the country literally tore itself in two over one single fundamental issue: slavery. On one side, you had the Union states in the North fighting to keep the country together and to outlaw slavery. And on the other, the Confederate states in the South fighting to leave the U.S. and preserve the institution of slavery, which their entire society was built on.
And right in the middle of that war came this absolutely pivotal moment, the Emancipation Proclamation. This was a wartime order, and it declared that all enslaved people in the rebelling Confederate states were now free. It fundamentally changed what the war was about, officially turning it from a conflict just about preserving the Union into a war to end slavery itself.
But even after the Union won the war and slavery was abolished, the struggle for real equality was far from over. A new system of oppression rose up in the South. These were called Jim Crow laws, and they brutally enforced racial segregation for decades to come.
And if you just look at the right to vote, you can see how slow and hard-fought this progress has been. The country started with only white male property owners being able to vote. It took a constitutional amendment and decades of struggle to give that right to black men, and then another amendment to give it to women. And even then, it took the incredible efforts of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, with leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., to even begin to tear down the barriers that kept those rights from being a reality for everyone.
So beyond all the battles over government and rights, what about the people themselves? Let's take a look at some of the other huge challenges they faced and at the rich, diverse culture that really defines modern America.
In the 1930s, the nation faced a totally different kind of crisis, the Great Depression. This wasn't a war with armies and battlefields. It was a devastating economic collapse that touched pretty much everyone's life.
The impact was just staggering. Unemployment went through the roof, and millions of people suddenly found themselves without a job, without any hope. So many people had to rely on charity, standing in line at soup kitchens just to get a single meal. It was a time that deeply, profoundly shaped an entire generation.
Now for a fascinating little fact that actually says a lot about American identity. The United States does not have an official language. Nope. Sure, English is the most common one, but the country is, and really always has been, a place of many, many languages and cultures living side by side, constantly being refreshed by new waves of immigration.
And you can see this cultural mix everywhere. Just think about it for a second. Food, like hamburgers and pizza. The clothes we wear, like jeans and t-shirts. The sports we love, like baseball, basketball, and football. Even our holidays, like Thanksgiving and the 4th of July. These are all threads in the American cultural fabric, and so many of them have roots all over the world. This kind of cultural diversity isn't just an accident. It's woven right into the country's blueprint. The Constitution's guarantee of religious freedom, for example, is a huge reason why you see so many different faiths being practiced freely all across the nation.
Which brings us right back to that idea of building a country. It's not something that happened once and was finished. It's a process that's always happening. From its very first inhabitants, to its founding ideals, to its ongoing struggles for equality, America has always been a work in progress. So the real question is, what building blocks are going to define its next chapter?